I'm Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get.
So starting off the episode, me and Sam are going to be diving into the NBA. First coming out of the NBA world in terms of news is the NBA Horse Tournament. Now, I know all NBA fans, including ourselves, have been absolutely fiending for some NBA content, some sports content in general. So it's really nice to see the NBA trying to do something. Obviously, a horse tournament isn't the NBA playoffs, but we'll take it.
Yeah, we'll see. It should be an interesting thing. I'm curious to see like how they go about it. Like how are they gonna get put a camera crew in the houses, or are they gonna like do some sort of Skype call? Like I don't know how they're gonna connect the players with like what shot they do, but I'm excited to see what players they have and the actual intensity of it.
Yeah, I'm really curious to know, like, do all these players have their own, like, home courts? Because I know because of Corona,
Yeah, they have.
all places are closed down. So getting into a Woj tweet, so the NBA and ESPN plan to televise a horse tournament, and it's nearing completion, and among those expected to participate include Chris Paul, Trae Young, and Zach LaVine. Competition will also include a couple of WNBA players and recent NBA alums. So this is really reminiscent of what they kind of do in the NBA All-Star games. They always incorporate WNBA and NBA alum into it. So I think it's interesting. I would imagine Chris Paul, Trae Young, and Zach LaVine have their own courts. So that should be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I like the selection of players. Like, I don't want to see someone like Klay Thompson who's just like a spot-up shooter. I want
Yep.
to see someone like who can do things with the ball and like have just like a good handle of the ball. Because I would want to see someone like Jokic who always does like just crazy passes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm sure we're gonna get some Trae Young half-court shots going for sure.
Or like shoot over his house or something.
Yeah, and I'm sure they won't allow Zach LaVine to dunk, because nobody, especially Chris Paul, Trae Young, retired NBA players and WNBA players, they can't dunk like Zach LaVine could dunk. So I'm sure they won't do that. I think it's going to be pretty reminiscent of the old horse tournament they did way back in the day. I know Rondo and Kevin Durant participated in that. At one point, it just became a 3-point contest. And obviously, Kevin Durant's going to win that. But surprisingly, Rajon Rondo actually really held his own.
Yeah, I saw that in the 2009 like All-Star Weekend. They had one with Joe Johnson, KD, OJ Mayo, who is just not existent in the NBA world anymore.
Yeah.
But
very hard.
It's some sort of basketball we haven't had any in a while, so curious to see how it goes.
Yeah, I'll take it. I wonder how they'll like officiate it. I'm sure they won't be too strict, but it's hard to get like the specific angles when you're on video. I'm sure they'll have like a TV screen, these players, to see where the other teams are shooting. It's going to be interesting to see who's narrating it and announcing it too. I'm sure it'll be like Kenny the Jet Smith, Ernie Johnson, and that whole Shaq, Chuck, that whole TNT crew. So that should be interesting.
It seems Zach LaVine loves doing these like extracurricular activities. Like he was in the gaming tournament, he was in the 3-point contest, the dunk contest. I guess he thrives in these.
Yeah, he's very bored, like the rest of us. But yeah, I really like Zach LaVine. He's low key a very good player. He really did great on the Bulls this year. He was known just as a dunker at first, but then he really developed his 3-point shot, and he's been really, really good, especially this season.
I mean, he developed really well. At UCLA, he was like a bench player. He wasn't really, I don't think he was in the starting lineup that much. So it's good to see him like really elevate his game.
Yeah, players and just people around the NBA thought that contract he got, 1 or 2 summers ago, was really questionable, but I think in hindsight, it's become a really good contract, honestly.
Also, like being on the Bulls must help him a lot because his like the amount of shots he can take per game really.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure he wouldn't be averaging 25 if he was on a contending team, but I think he's a legit 2 or 3 on a contending team.
Yeah, definitely.
So So getting into more NBA content. So the NBA is proposing to cut players' salaries, and the league is asking for 50%, but the NBA Players Association is proposing 25% during the coronavirus shutdown. So getting more into that, I believe the NBA players just want 1% for each game missed. But I believe the the NBA players or the NBA owners want more than that.
I feel like this is just, I don't know, like a topic that like the owners and the players really need to agree on. I don't think it's like,
Yeah.
I think like time of the essence, like they can't really dispute it because like it's going to be a huge loss of money for the NBA, and I don't think they can really afford. They can really afford to keep playing players when they're not making money back by filling arenas and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think it's different from like the NFL Player Association, as where I think NFL players have much less leverage when negotiating things like this. I think NBA players have a bit more leverage in terms of holding out. NBA players have longer careers and they have larger salaries, so they could kind of afford to hold out more so than NFL players. It should be really interesting to see where this goes, but yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be somewhere near 25%. I think 50% is a little bit too much.
I mean, yeah, there's not that many games left, so like there's not that many more paychecks to be given out to players. So I think 25% would be a good amount.
Yeah, and I saw actually if 50% does pass, there's going to be some certain players who they've already gotten the majority of their salaries
Yeah, I
up
saw
front.
that.
So they're actually going to have to send checks to the NBA, and I just don't think that's realistic. LeBron James is one player where he got $18 million on his first paycheck up front, and he's made much more since then. So he would actually have to send a check to the NBA, and I don't see any way he would do that, or any NBA player would do that for that matter.
I don't think they would make them send the money back. I think like next year or the year after they would just restructure their contract to like alter it. I saw that like Ken Bazemore, like the way he was paid, he would have to give even more money than LeBron would have to give, which is like pretty insane since it's LeBron versus Ken Bazemore.
Yeah, that is crazy. And I think more importantly than the player salaries, I think it's the staff salaries for these NBA teams. People that aren't millionaires, people who just do arena maintenance or things of that nature. I know a lot of NBA players, Zion Williamson being one of them, donated money to his team staff. So I think it's more important for the NBA to try to not cut the salaries of those employees rather than their most important employees. But I think their most important employees, which are the players themselves, kind of realize that people who aren't millionaires are more important in this.
They're greatly more affected by this than the players actually are.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right, so our next topic we have is the Basketball Hall of Fame released through class of 2020. So we got the headliners obviously are Kobe, Tim Duncan, and Kevin Garnett, which no surprise, those are like three all-time players, so not really surprised there. And then we have Eddie Sutton, Rudy Tomjanovich, and then we got some other WNBA players like Tamika Catchings, Kim Moakley, Barbara Stevens, and Patrick Baum. And that's not a WNBA player, that's a FIBA executive actually.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, two of the greatest power forwards of all time, arguably. If Kevin Garnett didn't get drafted by the Timberwolves and he got drafted by the Spurs, we could be saying Kevin Garnett is the best power forward of all time. So, I mean, really great headliners. I like how Kevin Garnett and Tim Duncan are going into the Hall of Fame the same year because it kind of fuels the fire of who's the greatest power forward of all time.
Yeah, I think those three are pretty solid. Like, I don't think anyone deserves not to be in it. But the rest of the list, I don't know. like the Rudy guy, he only won 2 championships as a coach, and I don't understand how he can necessarily put that person in the Hall of Fame for only 2 championships.
Yeah, me and Sam visited the Hall of Fame not too long ago, and when you go, there's just an overwhelming amount of faces and inductees there. They're really running out of room, honestly, on their wall for people.
Yeah, I think that's the flaw of the Hall of Fame. I think they let a lot of people in that shouldn't really go in. Like,
yeah,
I know it's like the pro basketball, so that includes like college, like FIBA and like international play. But I don't know. I feel like it takes away from someone who actually deserves to be in if they let in lesser players.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think there should be an individual NBA Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I don't like how there's just a basketball Hall of Fame because, yeah, you have guys like a FIBA executive who are going to make it in when, that probably should be separate from Kobe Bryant getting in. So,
like Sabonis's dad, he played he had a very limited NBA career, but he was like one of the all-time greats in the international plays. I don't know, like he shouldn't be in the NBA, like around the NBA players if you only had a very short career.
Yeah, he was a great NBA player, but he came in at the twilight of his career. And yeah, for sure, he's not an NBA Hall of Fame player, but he's a basketball Hall of Fame player. So I think we do need to draw a line between those two things, for sure.
Yeah, the NBA Hall of Fame, or the Basketball Hall of Fame, I should say. It's very fun. I enjoy it. It's a good place there.
Yeah, get all the low hoops to dunk at. Very fun. I like how there's all the different, like, eras of basketball hoops too. Like you got the peach basket, you got like the bucket. It's very fun.
It's cool.
Great place. Great place. So transitioning from the NBA, we're gonna start talking about the NFL a little bit now. So our president said he wants the NFL to start on time in August. So he had a conference call with all the major league sports commissioners on Saturday. I would have loved to listen into that call. It would have probably been hilarious. But he said he believed the NFL season should start on time in September and activity should start in August. So I think that's really, really tough on the NFL players who need OTAs, need all that practice to really get into game shape, especially for new players to new teams and to rookies trying to get acclimated into a new system and trying to learn a new playbook. I think that's going to be really tough on them. And I think if the NFL starts on time, I think we're going to see some pretty bad football for the first couple weeks potentially. And I think we're going to see a lot of injuries as well in the first couple weeks of the NFL. So I don't know if it's the best idea, honestly, to start the NFL season on time. I know I would love for that to happen, but I don't know if it's the best idea.
I think the young athletes, like the new people to the NFL and like 1 and 2 year veterans, or not veterans, 1 and 2 year players, I think they'll be like naive about it and they'll be like, oh, we can suit up anytime, we don't need OTAs. But like actually when week 1 starts, I think they'll regret saying that or regret thinking that because it's a taxing, it's a very physical sport. So I think you need to like 2 months to get ready and to get going.
Yeah, and you need to get used to contact too. Some contacted practices are important for NFL players. And it's really important for rookies, especially, to get a game simulation into practice with that game speed because these college players aren't used to it yet. So I think we're going to see if, again, the NFL season starts on time. A lot of players struggle with the season, honestly.
Yeah, I just like the college football, like NCAA, they said if there wasn't a vaccine by July, they wouldn't have the college football season.
Yeah.
I don't know how the NFL would be able to start around the same time as college football and just go ahead with it.
Yeah, I think it's just really unrealistic to expect the NFL season to start on time. I think Trump just kind of wants everything to get going and the economy to start going again. I think that's the main thing more than anything else. But for safety, I don't think that's probably the smartest idea.
I mean, I think they can like delay the start like in November or like even start in December and have it go like into the spring. That'd be easier because I saw them like the Masters is being moved to November.
Yeah.
Like I think canceling the season like might be an option, but also like delaying the start of it would be a helpful option too because you would still get the revenue from all those games. It wouldn't be just a wasted time.
Yeah. Exactly. I saw they might start to draft an alternate schedule, maybe like a 12-game schedule. But I think if we just move it back and wait it out, then I think we can still have the same schedule, same format, and I think they should be good. But Corona for sure, it's affecting a lot of things with the NFL. Obviously the start of the season. One big thing it's also affecting is free agency. I thought players like Tom Brady, for example, would lean more towards staying with the Patriots because of Corona, because now he has to go to a new system and get acclimated very quickly. But obviously that wasn't true with Brady. He went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But I think more than that, it's very damaging to players who were not healthy last season, who can't get a physical right now. And
Yeah.
in result of that, can't get a job. So transitioning from the NFL season opening in August, me and Sam are going to talk about top free agents still available. And the two glaring free agents that are still available are Cam Newton and Jadeveon Clowney. And those are two players who still have their physicals pending. And we're not going to know their physicals and whether they're good or not until they can go into a team's office and perform a physical, because teams around the NFL aren't going to trust the Panthers physical of Cam Newton, and teams in the NFL aren't going to trust the Seahawks physical of Jadeveon Clowney. They want their own doctors to assess them.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's something that's really important to figure out because Cam Newton, like his career is like as good as he was, he's an MVP. He was an MVP, but his career has been surrounded by a lot of injuries: shoulder, leg, ribs. I think that's something that really needs to be figured out before you go ahead and draft him. Sign him.
Yeah, so I think in a regular offseason, I think a player like Jadeveon Clowney and Cam Newton would have already gotten signed. But again, because of this, they're still free agents.
Yeah. I think Cam Newton, I saw like reports of him going to the Raiders maybe, or even the Patriots. I don't know about the Patriots one, but I'm curious to see who would draft him and who would. I keep saying draft. Who would sign him and who he would fit in the scheme with.
Yeah, I think Cam Newton's a player where you don't plug him into your scheme. You try to have your scheme fit around him. He's Cam Newton. Is an MVP player. He won MVP in 2015. He led the Panthers to a 15-1 record that year. He was a couple plays short of a Super Bowl victory. I mean, Cam Newton's a great player, and I think he could still be a top 15, top 10 quarterback in the league if he's healthy. Those first two games of the season he played with the Panthers were really, really rough this season. You could just obviously tell that he was hurt, and the Panthers honestly played better with Kyle Allen in at quarterback, and that's not because Cam Newton's a worse quarterback. I think Cam Newton was just really injured, and they were trying to hide his injury.
Well, I just think once they got Kyle Allen in the lineup, like Ron Rivera just like took over more of like everything. He was able to control more of the offense.
Yeah,
so able to just like run the ball down the opponent's throat with Christian McCaffrey, and there wasn't like it was very hands-on with Kyle Allen. Like as if Cam Newton was in the lineup, like you can't. He's a veteran. He's 31 years old. You're not gonna go up to Cam Newton and tell him like, no, this is the way we're gonna do it. Like it's gonna be Cam's way.
Yeah, I would warn teams like the Panthers and teams like the Giants where they have these great talents at running back, Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey, and they're running them into the ground and giving them such a huge workload when they're winning 5 games, 4 games, 3 games. I think they have to start to try to save those types of players for when their roster is competent to make a playoff run. Because if Christian McCaffrey for the next couple seasons, because I really don't think the Panthers are going to be too good next year either, with Teddy Bridgewater, I don't see them making the playoffs. I could see them winning 6, 7, 8 games, maybe 9 games, but they're in a tough division now. They have the Tom Brady-led Buccaneers, who almost made the playoff. They went 7-9 with a quarterback who threw 30 interceptions, who's also a free agent, Jameis Winston. So I think the Buccaneers are going to make the playoffs next year. I think the Saints are a near lock for the playoffs. And I think even the Falcons could be better than the Panthers next year. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's, now looking at it, that's one of the toughest divisions in football.
Yeah, it is.
The Panthers, like, say what you will about their coach, but they have a really strong roster, and like they'll be competitive in most games, even if they have a crappy record.
Yeah, they're one of those teams where they have a bad record, at least last year, but you still don't want to face them on your schedule. And same with the Falcons, for that matter. They beat the 49ers last year in that really close game, and the 49ers ended up going to the Super Bowl. So you have some really, really tough teams in that division, with a lot of high-powered offenses and really competitive.
Like, I think like a team like the Panthers and Giants with McCaffrey and Barkley, I think they need to like draft or sign like another running back to take some of the workload off. Because I'm looking at the free agents right now, and you have like Lamar Miller and Devontae Freeman and Carlos Hyde still like looking for a team.
Yeah, Lamar Miller is a really, really good running back, actually. I mean, he's been hurt the past couple seasons, but if you have Lamar Miller as your secondary running back, catching balls out of the backfield, he's, kind of a poor man's Christian McCaffrey in a sense. He could do it all, but not one thing too well. So, yeah, that would be a great scheme fit right there. Getting more into free agents, I think I think the most interesting free agent is Jameis Winston. I think he kind of got blackmailed a little bit out of Tampa Bay in terms of just Bruce Arians' scheme. I think it was kind of a disaster from the start. I thought people were wrong when they thought the Bruce Arians Jameis Winston marriage would be good. I've watched a lot of Bruce Arians football. He's had Andrew Luck as his quarterback. He's had Ben Roethlisberger. He's had Peyton Manning. He's had Carson Palmer. These guys had pretty high interception seasons under Bruce Arians, and the Bruce Arians offense demands you to throw the ball down the field, no risk it, no biscuit football. And I think that that right there spells disaster for Jameis Winston. I think Jameis Winston, he has great arm talent. He's a great down the field thrower, but I think he would excel more in a system that highlights taking the safe options, thinking and dunking a little bit, because Jameis Winston isn't the best decision maker. So I don't think you should put him in positions where he has to throw a 50-50 ball, because that's going to result in him having a 30 interception season. And now I'm not saying it was all Bruce Arians. Obviously, Jameis Winston definitely needs to improve on his decision making, but Jameis Winston is, I think, a starting level quarterback in the NFL. I don't think he would be an ideal starter, but if he can go into a place like Pittsburgh and back up Ben Roethlisberger, I think that would be a great landing spot.
Yeah, I think Jameis Winston's biggest flaw is he just tries to make the most out of every play. He doesn't look for the safe route. He really just tries to drive it down the field and like throw in the triple coverage. Like, he acts like every play is like a Hail Mary to win the game, or like one throw to win the game. He's not
true.
He's not throwing like across like 5-yard check down, 10-yard first down. He's not doing that. Like, I think he just thinks he's still like at Florida State, throwing to like the best college roster in the nation.
Yeah, he doesn't really look at like the bigger picture. I think he tries to go out every play in every game and prove like, yeah, I was the number one pick for a reason. When in the NFL, you gotta take your losses and live another down. Because you throw the ball out of bounds, you punt, pin the team in bad field position, compared to you throw a pick six. Now that's a 7-point swing right there. So I think if Jameis Winston gets coached up right, I think he could still end up being a good quarterback and having a Ryan Tannehill-esque season.
Yeah, because he's still young. He's still 26 years old, so there's still time to improve. It's not like he's at the end of his career.
Yeah, and players seem to like Jameis Winston too. He seems to be a pretty vocal leader.
Yeah.
And players seem to play around him pretty well. So I don't think that's a problem with Jameis Winston. I think it's just strictly his play. So if he could kind of humble himself and go to a place where he would be a backup, again, I think Pittsburgh is a really good place for him to go because Ben Roethlisberger has very, very shaky injury history. He's been getting hurt the past couple of seasons. Obviously, he really didn't play last year with that season-ending injury, but he gets multiple concussions a season, and that quarterback room for the Steelers really was really bad last year. Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, they had their moments, but they're not starting NFL quarterbacks. I don't even know if Duck Hodges and Rudolph are even backups per se. So I think if they brought in a player like Jameis Winston, I think that'd be great. But Ben Roethlisberger is somebody who hates when the Steelers bring in other quarterbacks. He got extremely mad when they drafted Mason Rudolph and demanded that they sign him to an extension. So he's not a guy like Drew Brees where they sign Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Brees greets him with open arms and teaches him. I don't think that's the case with somebody like Ben Roethlisberger, but I think Jameis Winston is good enough to where he takes over that starting job and he could be really good because the Steelers almost made the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
Too. So they're definitely a playoff caliber roster. So if he went to a team like that, I think that would be great for him.
I don't know. I feel like they would be a little risky too because Ben Roethlisberger's similar to Jameis Winston, where he kind of just throws it up as well. He might get the false notion that I can still do this, I can still chuck it up.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe if the Saints wanted to sign him, that'd be great because that's a pretty conservative offense. But Sean Payton said he wants Taysom Hill to be their full-time backup now, which I think is interesting. And I don't think it's a great move, to be honest. I don't think Taysom Hill has proved or shown that he could be a backup quarterback in the NFL, and he could actually come into a regular offense and execute it. And I think they really love using him as a Swiss Army knife. And when you have him as your backup, you can't have him taking hits. You can't have him being the gunner on your kick return team because he gets hit. Then you have only Drew Brees. So I don't think it's the smartest idea for the Saints to keep Taysom Hill as the backup, but we'll see. There's not too many free agent quarterbacks out there who you're going to pay small bucks. Maybe Joe Flacco. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Joe Flacco retire in the near future. He really struggled with the Broncos, and I don't think he has a lot left. Yeah. So,
and we also have, like you said earlier, Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah.
Still available. I saw some reports of him going to the Titans because Rabel was the defensive line coach at the Texans, so that he had the better relationship there. But I think that would be him and the Texans. That would be a pretty good fit.
I know he bumped down his asking price from I think like 20 to 18 and then to like 18 to 16 mil a year. I think because of his injury history and his physical and everything considered, I think he does resign with the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks really need him. They traded for him. They gave up some draft picks. And in some Seahawks games last year, he was their best player. I know that 49ers game last year, he was all over the field. Jadeveon Clowney, when he's on, he's one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. It's all about the injury, and it's all about the consistency with him. So,
yeah, I think just like he's not very consistent, and it doesn't look like he gives his all on every play. So I think that like he really needs to fix that problem, and I think more teams would be coming after him.
Yep.
All right, so moving on to our next topic. The NFL released their all-decade team. It's a pretty interesting list. There's a lot of like surprises and a lot of pretty obvious players on it.
Yep. I think they do have some misses, but there's no glaring submission where I'm like, that player really shouldn't have made it. I think all the players kind of deserve to make it. I think Tyreek Hill at the punt returner is a little bit questionable. Tyreek Hill is a great punt returner, don't get me wrong, but Tyreek Hill only returned punts for a couple of years this decade, and he didn't rack up the amount of return stats as some of these other guys did that missed the cut. So I thought that was kind of an interesting pick.
Yeah, I feel like they just picked Tyreek Hill for the name notability.
Yeah, the namesake. Yep.
But I think Brady and Rodgers at quarterback is, I mean, it's pretty good. Rodgers might be a little questionable. You might look at Brees to be on it. Over him.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really complain there. Also, Travis Kelce, he's a bit younger.
Yeah, Travis Kelce. I don't really like the Travis Kelce one either. I thought there was actually a couple of tight ends that probably should have made it over Travis Kelce. We'll get into that in a little bit, though.
But then looking at the defensive side of the ball, I think it's pretty good as well. No complaints there. I think they did a good job up and down the whole list.
Yeah, they did. I know there's some controversy surrounding two admissions into this, Antonio Brown and Patrick Peterson. And that's because of, obviously, with Antonio Brown, his off-the-field antics. And I think more importantly than that, we have Patrick Peterson with his PED suspension. Now, not only did Patrick Peterson get suspended for PEDs last year and cheating with an illegal substance, but they found a masking agency as well, which means he was deliberately trying to hide it. So usually what happens when a player gets caught with not only PEDs but a masking agency, usually it's a case where these players have been doing it for a long time and the NFL testing kind of finally caught up.
Yeah.
So we really don't know how many years Patrick Peterson has been using PEDs. I know he said he had, I think in his second or third season, he had diabetes. And he played really, really, really bad that year. And then since then, he started playing really good again. So I think if you hit that season where he started using PEDs potentially, I think that's pretty plausible. There's no way we know for certain. But I don't have a problem with Patrick Peterson being on the list. He's been one of the best cornerbacks in the league the past decade. I think there's been a couple seasons where he's been the best cover corner in the entire NFL. But if I saw him not on this list because of the PEDs, I would respect that, I would say.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's pretty, because Richard Sherman, he's a very he's a zone cornerback. He's not really man to man.
Yeah.
So I think Revis is the best out of the three, then Sherman. But I think for a third option, I think Patrick Peterson is the best one available.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I thought the Tyrann Mathieu submission was a little bit odd as well. He's been great. I mean, he just won a Super Bowl in this decade and really led that Chiefs defense. And he was really, really good with the Cardinals as well. But he's had somewhat of an injury history as well. And he's had some quiet seasons in Arizona, but he's been a great DB.
Yep, I agree. I think he would have got picked a lot higher in the NFL draft as well, but he just had the drug problems.
Yeah, he was a surefire NFL talent. I mean, you knew coming out of LSU, Tyrann Mathieu, the Honey Badger, was going to be a very, very good to great NFL player. It was just all the drug related incidents and crime related incidents that plagued his career at LSU and ended up getting him kicked off the LSU team. So Cardinals took a chance on him in the third round, and it ended up turning out great. And he's a great person, a great leader now. So really great signing for the Chiefs.
I agree. I think he was that was the Chiefs' struggle in they didn't really have a good corner or secondary. So I think signing him, he was a really good a leader in the secondary and really helped everything out.
Yeah, and it really talking about this all decades team, it really bums me out that Eric Berry didn't get to be a part of that Chiefs Super Bowl run, really.
Yeah.
Because he was a great player. He for sure was one of the best safeties, if not the best safety in this decade. So I'm glad they put him part of this list. Great comeback story with the cancer too.
Yeah, definitely.
So in lieu of the NFL All-Decade team for the 2010s, there's a lot of people that did not make the list. And so what me and Sam did is we comprised our own 2010 All-Decade team, but we used players who did not make the official 2010 All-Decade team. So when we're reading off our All-Decade team and you kind of notice, oh, where's that player? They probably made the All-Decade team. So
All right, so who wants to go first?
you can go first.
All right, we'll do a snake. So I'm gonna go and then you go two times in a row, right?
Yeah, so before we go, me and Sam are going to be selecting one quarterback each, one running back each, two wide receivers, one flex position, one tight end, one player from each offensive line position, two defensive ends, one defensive tackle, two outside linebackers, one middle linebacker, two cornerbacks, two safeties, one punter, one kicker returner, one punt returner, and one coach. So the floor is yours, Sam. You can go first.
Before I start, I just want to say that it was pretty tough finding players because you find players that are were too old in the decade or too young in the decade, so you didn't really know if they would be deserving because if someone's too young, odds are they'll probably be in the 2020 All-Decade team, or if someone's too old, they're probably in the 2000 All-Decade team.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty hard. But
yeah, it was tough to find players who played from 2010 to 2019. So I think me and Sam both are gonna have a lot of players who played only 4, 5, 6 years in this era, and that's okay and that's understandable because the All-Decade team had that too. So yeah, without further ado.
All right, so for quarterback, I think it's pretty obvious. The biggest snub, Drew Brees.
Yep.
I mean, 2011 Offensive Player of the Year, 6 playoff appearances, 46,700 passing yards in this decade, which is just insane.
Yep.
I was also considering Russell Wilson, and the amount of passing yards he had was around almost 30,000, which he had 16,000 more, which is just insane.
Yep.
He's one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. I would personally take him over Rodgers in the All-Decade team list. I think he should be in there.
Interesting. And yeah, obviously he won the Super Bowl in February of 2010, but that's not considered the in the decade in terms of seasons. So we're not really going to count his Super Bowl victory. But yeah, he's arguably the greatest statistical quarterback of all time, and he really cemented that in the 2010s. So that's a great pick. He's also a 9-time Pro Bowler. He's just a great player. Now where I'll push back on that a little bit and where I made my pick is I don't like Drew Brees in the playoffs too much. Drew Brees has a 4-6 record in the playoffs. He's had 3,000 passing yards in the playoffs, 21 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, only one game-winning drive, and he has one fourth quarter comeback. So I know the Saints have been screwed by the refs.
Yeah.
The playoffs a little bit, but I think some of that goes on Drew Brees. There's a lot of times, like the Rams game, for example, they had a whole overtime drive to go down the field and score, and they didn't seize that opportunity. So I think a lot of things that happened to them are unfortunate, but I think they still could have pulled out and won those games. Whereas Aaron Rodgers, for example, who's been to a lot of NFC championships in the 2010s, I think it's been more of his team. I forget his name, that tight end dropping the onside kick against the Seahawks.
Oh, yeah.
But getting into my quarterback pick, you alluded to him. I'm picking Russell Wilson, Seattle Seahawks quarterback from 2012 to 2019. So interesting. He came in to the league from Wisconsin and was really seen as the third quarterback on that depth chart. Quickly won the starting job, and from 2012 on, he's gone 86-41-1 as a starter. He's had 29,734 passing yards, 227 touchdowns, and only 68 interceptions, which is insane. His per 16 game stats aren't nearly as good as Drew Brees are, but I think at the beginning of his career, they kind of leaned on his defense more. But in his career, he has 21 fourth quarter comebacks and 28 game winning drives, which is just insane. I mean, he is absolutely clutch. He's also had around 4,000 rushing yards and 19 rushing touchdowns, which is also great. He's a 6-time Pro Bowler, and obviously he won a Super Bowl in this decade, which is absolutely fantastic. And he came up just short of a second Super Bowl. So he's made 2 Super Bowls this decade. He has a 9-6 playoff record, and he has 4 game-winning drives in the playoffs and 4 fourth quarter comebacks. So he's been a great player this decade.
Yeah, I completely agree because he's just like the heart of the Seahawks. Like as of recently, their offense isn't as good and their defense isn't as good. So he's really leading the whole team. He was like, I think personally, he was an MVP candidate this year.
Yep.
So I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think when the Seahawks decided to pass on that fateful second down, and ended up getting intercepted and losing the Super Bowl, I think that's really when they transitioned from like the Marshawn Lynch and like ground and pound and defensive grind era of the Seahawks to the Russell Wilson passing era of the Seahawks, and they haven't been as successful in that era. It's very hard to win when your quarterback is taking up so much of your salary, but I think if one quarterback and team could do it, I think it's Russell Wilson and the Seahawks. So getting into my running back, I think the All-Decade team did a great job at picking the best running backs. I wouldn't pick any of these guys to be on the All-Decade team, but for my All-Decade running back, I'm going to pick Jamal Charles, who started with the Chiefs. He had 1 season with the Broncos. He entered the league in 2010, and he played until 2018. He's had 6,000 rushing yards, 37 rushing touchdowns, and he's had 5.29 yards per attempt, which leads the decade, which is just absolutely insane. He's a burner. He's so fast. He was the heart and soul of that Chiefs offense for a very long time. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler. He's a 2-time All-Pro, which is really impressive. All-Pro is much more important than Pro Bowl in my eyes. He's had a 19 touchdown season this decade, which led the league, and he also had a 14 touchdown season. I mean, give me prime Jamal Charles any day of the week. He's a great player. He's also a good receiver out of the backfield.
I completely agree. He was actually my first running back option. Like the Chiefs' offense in the 2010s with Andy Reid and Alex Smith, it was a pretty dry offense, and he was really able to like get points on the board. They just dumped him the ball. So I think that he like really catapulted that team into making the playoffs each year, even though they would lose regularly at home.
Yeah.
For my running back, I had Matt Forte.
Interesting.
It's a little interesting, but he had 7,629 rushing yards, 3,724 receiving yards. So he can pretty much just do it all. He was a monster in his prime. He had 42 total touchdowns, 17 receiving touchdowns. So I think he just like was able to do it all. The Bears teams were pretty weak when he played. So I think like he was able to really just, even though he was on a bad team, he was really able to show how good he really was. He was a 2-time Pro Bowler. I know like the All-Decade team actually like they got all the right running backs, so it was pretty hard to find someone who could be a replacement. So I think Matt Forte he's right up there with Jamal Charles.
Yeah, Matt Forte was a great player. He was Le'Veon Bell before Le'Veon Bell entered the league. That kind of big, stocky, patient running back who was really good at carrying the ball. Not only that, but receiving it out of the backfield. Really good blocker. He was also like Jamal Charles was to the Chiefs. He was the heart and soul of that Bears offense, along with Jay Cutler. So that's a good pick by you. I had him on my radar as well for that pick.
So for my wide receiver,
First wide receiver.
First wide receiver. He didn't play too much in this decade, but you got to give it to DeAndre Hopkins. Nuke.
Oof. All right, yep.
Just he's a two-time pro. He's a two-time All-Pro, which is just already in this decade. And Jamal Charles was a two-time All-Pro, and he played more in the decade than DeAndre Hopkins. So he already left his mark on the decade.
Yep.
8,602 receiving yards, 632 catches, 54 touchdowns. He was the heart and soul of the Texans offense. He never drops the ball. Like the amount of balls he drops is like very minimal. So I know he had a very short a very small sample size in this decade, but I think you got to give it to him.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic pick. He's had 5 1,000-yard seasons. I mean, he's been the safety blanket for any quarterback that has played on the Texans, and the Texans have had very, very shitty quarterbacks up until Deshaun Watson. So, yeah, that's a great pick. And last year in the playoffs, he had 9 catches and 118 yards in that playoff game versus the Chiefs. So he ended his Texans career with a bang. I'm excited to see what he can do in Arizona. He's had a Larry Fitzgerald-esque career so far, so hopefully he can continue that trajectory. And I think he's going to be a real weapon for the Cardinals offense. So going into my wide receiver 1, bit of a surprise here, I think. I think people kind of have a recency bias and forget about this player because he missed all of last year, but I'm going to pick A.J. Green. He got drafted in 2011 with Julio Jones. There's a real conversation. Who is better, Julio Jones or A.J. Green, their first couple seasons in the NFL? He's had 602 catches, 8,907 receiving yards, and 63 touchdowns this decade. He's had 6 1,000-yard seasons. He made the 2011 All-Rookie team, and he's had 7 Pro Bowls. He's a lanky wide receiver. He's fast. He's just a great target. I'm really glad he was willing to stay with the Bengals for the next upcoming season because I think he could break out next year. I think he still has a lot left in the tank going into the 2020s. But with that being said, he was a great player this decade. I'm really excited to see what Joe Burrow does with him. And the Bengals have some good weapons around Joe Burrow, just not great offensive linemen.
If they get Joe Burrow, we're not.
Yeah. It's a block, but.
I completely agree. A.J. Green, 7-time Pro Bowler. I think with his injuries and all that, he gets put in the shadow of Julio Jones a lot. But he is just a big body, lanky, like the new age wide receiver of lanky, fast, long legs.
Yep. So going into my wide receiver number 2, I'll leave him for you. I'm going to pick Dez Bryant here, who played from 2010 to 2017. He's had 531 catches this decade, 7,459 yards, 14 catches per reception, or 14 yards per reception. He's had 73 touchdowns. He's had 3 1,000-yard seasons, which really isn't a lot, but he led the league in touchdowns once with 16. And the thing with Dez Bryant is the Cowboys always have the most vanilla, simple offense in the NFL. They do nothing schematically to help their wide receivers get open. They do nothing schematically to help their quarterback out. So I think it's really impressive that Dez Bryant, with his combination of size and speed, has been able to be such a great target for Tony Romo for so long in that decade and for Dak Prescott for 1 or 2 years. He did it all from the X position, which is extremely difficult. You see a lot of guys, even DeAndre Hopkins, for example, even Julio Jones, sometimes they'll line up at that slot position or different positions around the field to try to get them open. Dez Bryant, all from the X, has had just a great career. He's made 3 Pro Bowls, and he's been a one-time first-team All-Pro. So I think Dez Bryant has been a great player this decade.
I don't know about that one. I think I had 2 other options. I think Dez Bryant, he's a very good talent, but I think probably because he was in the Dallas offense, that might have stunted production.
Yeah.
But if he was in the right system, I think he would would be able to like flourish more.
Yep.
So I have two options left. For this one, I'm gonna go with Demaryius Thomas.
Oh wow. Okay.
4-time All-Pro, Super Bowl champion,
Mm-hmm.
9,763 receiving yards, 724 catches, 630 touchdowns. Like he was with Peyton, and Tebow and all like everything in between. He was like the lifeblood of the receiving core. Like Peyton, a lot of the times Peyton would like throw like a 1 yard pass to him, and Demaryius Thomas would do the rest. I
Yep.
think he was just really was able to like catapult his career with like his speed and size.
Yep.
I know like he's kind of an underrated player. You don't really think about him with the top level wide receivers, but I think really with his stats and his performance on the field really like cemented him on my list.
Yeah, he's had some drop problems over certain seasons, but yeah, he's a great player. I think somebody that who is right on the cusp for my wide receiver, an honorable mention real quick, is T.Y. Hilton.
He was an honorable mention of mine as well.
Yeah, he led the league in yards in 2016. He has 5 1,000-yard seasons. So yeah, he's been a great player too.
Yeah, I was very up in the air with him and with Demaryius and T.Y. I don't know, I think Demaryius was more productive.
Yep.
T.Y.
Yep. So getting into the flex, I'm gonna go with my flex position first. Flex is a little weird in terms of all decade. I try to think of a flex player who could kind of do it all. He could run the ball a little bit. He could catch the ball out of the backfield a little bit. So for my flex player, I picked Arian Foster from the Houston Texans. He played from 2010 to 2016 in this decade. He's had 6,270 rushing yards, 51 rushing touchdowns. He's had 247 catches, 2,253 receiving yards, and he's had 14 receiving touchdowns. And he actually led the league in rushing in 2010 with 1,616 rushing yards. And he's played in 4 playoff games, and in 4 playoff games, he's had 515 yards. I think it's kind of forgotten that Arian Foster carried some mediocre Texans offenses to the playoffs a good amount of times with some pretty bad quarterbacks, and he really has shown off in those playoff games as well. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler, and he's a 1-time first-team All-Pro. He's kind of somebody who's forgotten in the decade because of his injury history, and he was kind of on a Texans team who didn't have the most potent offense, but he was a great fantasy player for a really long time, and I think he's a good flex.
Yeah, I agree. He's a solid, like everything, can do pretty much anything in the offense. He's very underrated. A lot of people forgot about him. Him and Andre Johnson really led some of those like Texans offenses with T.J. Yates and.
Yeah, and I think he had a better peak than Darren Sproles did, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Arian Foster in that flex instead of Darren Sproles for the all-decade team.
So for my flex, very underrated player, a fan favorite. Everybody loves him. I had Danny Woodhead. It's a little questionable. I don't know. I struggled with the flex player. I couldn't really think of someone who would do everything and I thought of Danny Woodhead because he would play offense, special teams, like kickoff. He was all over like New England and the Jets.
Yeah, so Chargers as well.
Yeah, Chargers. I think for the Ravens for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We had almost 5,000 total yards. He had 32 total touchdowns. Not the best stats, but I think that he had 4,000 total yards, which is pretty great. Yeah, that's
he's
my
a great player. Yeah, he was a very fun player to watch too, Danny Woodhead. I went to a Patriots game when Danny Woodhead was playing, actually, and everybody in the stadium had a hard hat on with a slab of wood that said Woodhead on it. So he's a fan favorite. Great player, very entertaining to watch.
So yeah, I love Danny Woodhead. For my tight end, I had Jason Witten.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a pretty understandable one. He led the decade. He led all tight ends in catches this whole decade. 2-time All-Pro. Just above 6,000 yards, 36 touchdowns, 598 catches, two-time All-Pro. I don't know if I said that already, but
Yep.
I think he's one of the greatest tight ends of all time.
Yep.
He's really a backbone of that the Cowboys offense. I know you're a fan of his.
Yeah, I really think Jason Witten should have made the all-decade team above Travis Kelce. You know, one thing that's really important with tight ends is not only are they great blockers, which Jason Witten is, and Travis Kelce is too, don't get me wrong, but they're dependable. And Jason Witten has not missed one game in the 2010s. I know he missed the entire 2018 season because of retirement, but when he's been an NFL player, he has not missed one game in the 2010s, which, I mean, is absolutely incredible. He's Mr. Reliable, and he's going to be that with the Raiders too. You know, he's way past his prime, but he's reliable. He's never getting hurt. He's just a great player, great safety blanket for Tony Romo for a lot of years.
I just remember, I don't know if it was this decade, but I remember watching a clip of him, like his helmet flying off, and he kept running down the field with the ball. Like that just shows how like tough he was and how reliable he is.
Yeah, he's a great player. He's a great player. So for my tight end, I'm going to pick somebody who from 2010 to 2019, he played with the Bears and the Panthers, and I'm picking Greg Olsen. Among tight ends this decade, he's had the third most catches and the fourth most yards among tight ends. He's been a great blocking tight end as well, and he was really the staple of the passing offense for that great 15-1 Panthers team who made the Super Bowl that year. He had an 1,000-yard season that year. In this decade, he's had 565 catches, 6,867 yards, and 44 touchdowns, and he's made the Pro Bowl 3 times. He's gotten injured a little bit, especially as of late, but he's a great player as well.
Yeah, he was my second option. I completely agree. Just a really good wide receiver. He's like he helped revolutionize like the catching tight end.
Yep, for sure.
Completely agree.
Yep.
So
for my offensive tackle, I'm going to pick Andrew Whitworth. He played for the Bengals and the Rams this decade. I think Andrew Whitworth, I think it's a common theme in my list at least, when we're going to start reading it down with the players, is players who were great, but were on teams who weren't so great, so they don't get the recognition. And I think Andrew Whitworth is one of those players who played on the Bengals for a large part of this decade and really didn't get the recognition he deserved. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler. He's a 2-time first-team All-Pro, which is just absolutely great. He's a left tackle and had really solid offensive lines for the Bengals for a couple of years there. And he's just a great player, a solid player, and he doesn't really get hurt a lot. And he does not get a lot of penalties as well. So
I completely agree. He was a workhorse for the Browns. I'm not the Browns. I'm sorry.
Bengals.
I'm blanking on what team. Yeah, Bengals, and then later the Rams.
Yep.
But I think he was really reliable. Didn't miss a lot of games.
Mm-hmm.
He actually wasn't he wasn't the 2 tackles I considered. So I had for tackle, we're at tackle right now.
Yeah.
I zoned out for a second. I had Tyron Smith for the Dallas Cowboys. 2-time All-Pro. 7-time Pro Bowler. I think he was a backbone for the Dallas Cowboys line. Their line's so great up and down. Helped DeMarco Murray really have really solid years when he was on the team. That's not much else you can say there.
Yeah, Tyron Smith, great player. His later seasons kind of plagued with injuries a little bit, but yeah, he's a great player. So, yep.
For guard, I had Mike Iupati.
Yep.
4-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro. Solid his whole career. Played with the Cardinals for a little bit. He was solid there.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's on the Seahawks now, I believe. He's getting up there in age, but he's still a reliable person to have on your line.
Yeah, Mike Iupati is a really great player. He's really good on those Cardinals teams that had some good success in the later part of this decade. with Carson Palmer making that NFC Championship run. He was a really good player for them. So for my guard position, I'm going to pick a controversial player who people know for more of off the field or in locker room incidents, I should say, than his play on the field. But he's an absolute great player, and that's Richie Incognito. Um, he played for the Bills, the Dolphins, and the Raiders. He was a really great player for the Raiders this season. He's a four-time Pro Bowler, and PFF has him as a top 15 lineman of this decade. So, with all things aside, he's a really great player, and people actually seem to like him in the locker room. And he was a very entertaining player for Hard Knocks. So, I mean, but above everything else, he's a great player.
Yeah, I think he's a really good player, a really good anchor on your offensive line. He's a massive human being, so it's gonna be hard to get around him. I think his off the field problems might, like you said, might hurt his name and or teams being skeptical to sign him with the Dolphins and what he did before he signed with the Raiders. I think I would have him on my team personally if I was a GM. He's a great offensive lineman.
Yep. So I think you're up for centers, right?
Center, all right, yeah. For center, I had someone a little underrated. I had Nick Mangold.
Yeah, that was my top pick too.
7-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro. He played for the Jets for quite some time.
Yep.
He was an anchor on that offensive line, but since he was on the Jets, they didn't really have any deep playoff runs.
Yep.
Make the playoffs for that fact of the matter. But he was a solid player. Didn't miss a lot of games.
Yep.
He really helped their run game. Because when they made the playoffs, those 2 deep playoff runs, they had a great run game. That was mostly their offense with like Sean Green, Joe McKnight, Tom Jones. So he really helped catapult their offensive line and be able to have a really solid run game.
Yeah, he's one of those rare linemen too who people really recognize. He's a great player. You go to a Jets game, you're gonna see a lot of Nick Mangold jerseys. He's a great player. He's a fan favorite too. So for my center, I'm gonna pick somebody who just retired. Not too long ago, and that is Travis Frederick. It's really a shame he retired with his health conditions, but when he came into the NFL in 2013, he made an immediate impact for those Dallas Cowboys teams who were really bolstered by that insane offensive line they've had with DeMarco Murray running the ball behind them and with later Ezekiel Elliott running the ball behind them. That rookie year with Dak Prescott, I thought, was their best year for their offensive line. I mean, Dak Prescott just had all day to throw. Travis Frederick is a great player. He's made 6 Pro Bowls. He's been a one-time first-team All-Pro, which was in 2016. He made the 2013 NFL All-Rookie team, so he's been a great player.
Yeah, I agree. The running backs behind that Dallas line, DeMarco Murray to Zeke, like they were able to have such great seasons because of the offensive line, I think.
Yep.
So I think that it was a great pick.
Yep. So getting into defensive linemen now, we're going to start with defensive ends. I'm going to pick my first defensive end. And the first guy I'm going to pick right off the board is going to be Cameron Wake. So Cameron Wake, he started his career in 2009, but from 2010 to 2019, he's played for the Miami Dolphins and the Tennessee Titans. And Cameron Wake has been an absolute great player. He's made 5 Pro Bowls. He's a one-time first-team All-Pro. He's had 4 Player of the Weeks. He's made the top 100 6 times. He's had a 14-sack season, a 15-sack season, 11 sacks a couple times in his career. He led the league in tackles for loss in 2010. He's led the league in safeties twice. So he's just been a great player.
I agree. He was my top player for defensive end. I'm surprised he wasn't on the actual decade team list.
Yeah, I am too.
He was very, for the Dolphins, he was a back, their whole defense he was pretty much the star on their defense, really made them somewhat productive on their defense.
Yep.
So for my DN, he didn't play too much in this decade. He was on the Vikings and later on Chicago. I had Jared Allen.
Yeah.
He was a All-Pro in 2011, two-time Pro Bowler in 2011, 2012.
Mm-hmm.
He was more productive in the previous decade, but I think that even though he had a small sample size, you can't doubt how good he really was.
Mm-hmm.
All kids who watch football when they were younger would do his sack celebration with like stirring the pot and then his arms up in the air. I think he's just a great player.
Yeah, he is. He's a great personality too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he was undoubtedly the best defensive end in football for a couple of years there. And I think this decade he had one or two seasons at least where he was as well. So that's a great pick by you. I had him on my list as well. But for my second defensive end, I'm going to pick somebody who I thought could have made the all-decade team as well. And that's going to be Jason Pierre-Paul, who played the majority of this decade with the Giants. Right away, starting in 2011, he had 16.5 sacks. He's had a couple of seasons with over 10 sacks. He's had a touchdown this season. He's led the league in safeties once. He's playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now. He still had a really good season with them. He's made 2 Pro Bowls, but he's been a one-time first-team All-Pro. He's just been a great player this decade. He's a Super Bowl champion this decade with the Giants and was really a staple along with Justin Tuck of that great Giants defensive line. And I think that defensive line for the Giants are really the reason they beat the Patriots in those 2 Super Bowls, because they're able to get interior pressure with Tom Brady and get after him and rush him.
I'm a little surprised at that. I thought about having Pierre-Paul on mine, but I think he had a good like small little, he had a good career, but then like when his hand got hit by the firework, a lot of people like stopped thinking about him for some reason. So I think if like that never happened, or if he was able to like, even if it did happen and he was able to shy away from it and like not have that affect his career, I think he would have had a more productive career.
Yep, for sure.
For mine, I had Cameron Hayward of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yep.
He's more of he looks like a D tackle. He's more of a bigger guy, not really someone you would find in the DN position, but 2-time All-Pro in 2017 and 2019, 3-time Pro Bowler. His stats aren't as high as everybody else on the list, or who you would say, but he's a real anchor on those Steelers defense teams, even though like recently they haven't been as like strong on the defensive side. Since like the early 2000s, they were like, everybody knew them as like a defensive team and not an offensive team like they have been recently. But I think he was able to be a good like protect the line and not let like a strong running game against them. I think he was a good pick.
Yep.
So for D tackle, I had Haloti Ngata.
Huh.
He played for the Ravens, played for the Lions for a little bit. I think he was just the strong Ravens teams when they won the Super Bowl. He was the centerpiece of that defense. D tackle, clogged up the lanes. His stats might not be as high as everybody else, but you weren't able to really run the ball on the Ravens.
Yep.
Because he was just clogged the whole middle.
Yep. No, he's a great player. Great player, for sure. So getting into outside linebackers, so we're picking 2 outside linebackers. My first outside linebacker is actually a member of the official 2000s all-decade team. Now, I know he had a better career in the 2000s, but he still had a very great career in the 2010s. He only played 4 seasons from 2010 to 2016, retired a Super Bowl champ, and that's DeMarcus Ware. Really just a great player for the Broncos this decade and for the Cowboys for a couple seasons this decade. I mean, in 2011, he had 19.5 sacks. He led the league in sacks in 2010. I mean, and him and Von Miller on those edges were really some of the most dominant edge duo we've ever seen in the NFL. And that Broncos defense is arguably the greatest defense in NFL history. And DeMarcus Ware was a huge part of that. He's made 6 Pro Bowls this decade, and he made 1 first-team All-Pro this decade. So I know he was a better player in the 2000s, but I still think he deserves a pick here for the 2010s All-Decade team.
Yeah, he was on my list. I think he was really he made playing against the Broncos really scary, having him and Von Miller come from both sides.
Yep.
I completely agree with it. So you're gonna go with your second outside linebacker?
Oh yeah, all right. So my second outside linebacker, he's a player who he switched around a couple times in terms of his position, but he's been an outside linebacker the majority of his career, and that's going to be Clay Matthews. I know he was another fan favorite. Played with the Packers for most of his career. Then he played for the Rams. I know he's a free agent now, but he had some really great seasons with the Packers. He had a couple 13 sack seasons. He had a couple 11 sack seasons. Was always that staple of the Packers defense, really. He's a 6-time Pro Bowler this decade. And he made 1 first-team All-Pro this decade. So I think Clay Matthews is a great pick for this decade.
I think that Clay, he's a good player, but I think he was injury riddled a lot of his career. So I think that really hurt his chances of being more of a star than he already was. But
yeah,
I agree with the points you made that he all his stats, but I don't know. I didn't put him on my list.
Yeah.
So for my list, for my outside linebacker number 1, I had Terrell Suggs. He played a lot. He played from 2003, so till he had a lot of play in the early 2000s. So a lot of people say he might have been in his twilight of his career.
Yeah.
But he moved around a lot, like previous players you mentioned. But I think he just a solid play on the Ravens defense. He made, like I said earlier, he made people scared to play him. Like they had Haloti Ngata him. Just a solid team. They won a deep Super Bowl run with him, so he has a ring. But
he has 2 rings now.
Yeah,
with the
2 rings
as well.
I think it's hard to argue him not being on the list. I think a lot of people said he was a snub for not being on the actual all-decade list.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great pick.
So for my next pick for outside linebacker, he's a little underrated. Not a lot of people appreciate him. He's on a pretty bad franchise. I had Ryan Kerrigan.
Yeah.
4-time Pro Bowler. Played from 2011 to 2019. Still playing. I know the Redskins haven't been always a great team, but he was able to put up pretty good stats even on a poor team. He had 90 sacks from 2011 to 2019, which is pretty high.
Yeah.
I think fumble recoveries, he had 3 fumble recoveries. Solo tackles, he had 321 solo tackles, which he was able to rack up. People weren't able to run around him. He was able to rack up tackles. He's not a big name like Clay Matthews or Terrell Suggs, but I think he was still able to be a productive player.
Yeah, Kerrigan was really good player. You never wanted to face Kerrigan on the Redskins. It's sad that defense wasn't really surrounded by too much other talent, though.
So for my first middle linebacker position,
yep,
I had Dante Hightower. Played with the New England Patriots, 3-time Super Bowl champion, 2-time All-Pro. Even though he hasn't been an All-Pro, but I think that he was the quarterback of that defense. A very strong defense through the years. So I think that he was able to be like Belichick's guy on the field to get everybody in the right place and make sure all the plays were being executed. Because even though the Patriots defenses weren't made up of a lot of stars, he was able to really corral them and have a solid defense through the years.
Yep. So for my middle linebacker pick, staying on the same team for the Patriots, this is a player who never won a ring with the Patriots, lost in Super Bowl, the 2011 Super Bowl against the Giants, and I'm going to pick Gerard Mayo. He was a really, really great linebacker for the Patriots. For a couple of years, he got drafted in 2008, but from 2010 to 2015, He led the league in combined tackles and solo tackles once with 174 combined tackles in one season, which is absolutely insane. He had another season in 2012 where he had 147 combined tackles, which is, again, absolutely insane. He was really like the heart and soul of that defense for a while. He made 2 Pro Bowls this decade. He's a one-time first-team All-Pro player this decade. He's somebody who kind of gets forgotten in the 2010s era because he wasn't a part of those Patriots Super Bowl teams, but he was a great player nonetheless.
I completely agree. He's a tackling machine. A lot,
Yeah.
like the anchor of that whole defense. He doesn't have a ring, and he doesn't have like the accolades that a lot of players have, but I think he still was able to put up stats like all the other guys. And I would, if I was a GM, I would take him to be on my team definitely.
Yeah, he's a great player. Had a short career, but great career nonetheless. So going into my cornerback 1, I'm gonna pick the best cornerback in the league right now. I'm gonna pick Stephon Gilmore. He had some quiet seasons with Buffalo to begin the decade from 2012 to 2016, but he was still a really, really great player in Buffalo, lockdown corner, and he really evolved into the best cornerback in the league with the Patriots, especially last season. I've only seen one game in my life where I haven't been like, wow, that wide receiver just cannot get past Stephon Gilmore, and that was actually week 17 against the Dolphins. Devontae Parker really gave Stephon Gilmore the works, but other than that, I think he's a great cornerback. He was the 2019 NFL AP Defensive Player of the Year, and that is really tough to win Defensive Player of the Year as a cornerback. So that's very impressive. Patriots had a historical defense this year, and he led that. He's made 3 Pro Bowls, and he's a 2-time first-team All-Pro.
Yeah, he was my my second cornerback. I think that he wasn't as strong as he was now when he was on Buffalo, but I think that he's a great player. I think he might be on the All-Decade team for 2020.
Yeah.
He's still young. He has a small sample size in this decade, but I completely agree. He was for him being a Defensive Player of the Year as a cornerback is like extremely impressive because that's usually like a D end or outside linebacker award.
Yep.
So for my cornerback, I had Aqib Talib.
Yeah, that was my second guy.
Super Bowl champion, 5-time Pro Bowler all in a row. 2016 All Pro. That like the Denver, you said earlier, the Denver defense was just extremely scary when you faced off against them, and then you couldn't really throw when you have Aqib Talib and Chris Harris on the other side. So he made them like shut down the passing lanes and just made time for the Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware to be able to get to the quarterback. So I think like if you don't have pretty solid cornerbacks, that's the whole defense would fall apart.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he was in Tampa Bay for a little while. Not as strong as like production when he was there. He went to New England. He in the playoffs when he played for New England, he was a little questionable. But I think he was really able to like salvage his career when he was on Denver.
Yeah. You know, he was a great player on Denver. He was part of arguably the greatest defense of all time. Him and Chris Harris Jr., who did make the all-decade team, were really, really just locked down for the Broncos. I mean, that Broncos defense just had no holes, and that secondary for sure is not an exception to that.
So for my second cornerback, another underrated player, I had Jonathan Joseph. Was on the Texans. A lot of people they don't consider him one of the top cornerbacks of the decade, just because he's a little slower, not like a notable name, but he was able to the Texans had a solid defense because of him, and he was able to shut down cornerbacks. I know the Colts, they had fits against playing the Texans sometimes. They would long defense, low-scoring defensive battles. 2-time All-Pro. I mean, 2-time Pro Bowl. He wasn't never an All-Pro, but he's still a great player. Yeah,
Jonathan Joseph is a really good pick, too. He was really good. So for my second cornerback, I'm gonna pick Joe Hayden. I know Joe Hayden complained about not making the All-Decade team. Now, while I don't think he should have made the All-Decade team, I still think he was on the outside looking in, so he had a chance. He got drafted in 2010, and he was really a victim of getting drafted to the Browns, who were a really bad team. He was an example of great player, horrible team. He had some really high interception totals some season with 6, 4, and 5 a few times. Lockdown corner on those Browns teams. He made the 2010 NFL All-Rookie team. He's made 3 Pro Bowls, and while not the flashiest cornerback, he's still a really, really good man-to-man cornerback who could line up against any player in his prime, and give him fits, really.
Yeah, I agree. He was one of my options. I think that him being on the Browns really hurt his notability and people recognizing his name, but he's still a great player.
Yeah, and he even had 5 interceptions on the Steelers last year, so he's kind of bouncing back a little bit. So, getting into safeties, you want me to pick one safety, then you'll pick your 2?
Yeah, I'll do that.
All right, so for my first safety, I'm gonna pick Cam Bam Chancellor. Sad that his career kind of ended short with that neck injury, but he played from 2010 to 2017. He was one of the best players with the Legion of Boom. Him and Earl Thomas were by far the best safety tandem in the NFL. While he wasn't the greatest cover safety, I think that's what Earl Thomas was for the Seahawks. So he really filled in that run role. He had 100 tackles in 2012, and 99 tackles the next season. The season prior, he had 97. So he was hovering around that 100 tackle mark when he was in his prime, and that's pretty difficult considering you have Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright and all those type of players on your defense as well, along with Richard Sherman and all those great big cornerbacks that they had. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler, and he's made the all NFL top 100 team a couple times this decade too. So
yeah, I completely agree. He was one of my safety picks. I think that he should have been on the list. I think he was snubbed.
Yep.
He would hit hard. People were scared to go over the top and have him just clobber you, which I just think he was a great player. He was a little questionable in coverage, but
yeah, I know he had that great game too. I remember in the playoff wild card round against the Vikings, that notorious Blair Walsh miss. Not too long before that, people forget the Vikings were about to score, and then he hit Adrian Peterson pretty hard and caused him to fumble. So, great player.
So for my first safety, I had Harrison Smith, 5-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro, drafted at Notre Dame in 2012. I think he's the leader of that Vikings defense. He was on some mediocre Viking defenses and was able to really have them become a really dominant defense because he was able to. I think Mike Zimmer puts a lot of trust in him, and he's able to pretty much freelance around the whole defense and on the field the whole game. So I think that if a coach puts that trust in a player, that shows how good he really is.
Yeah, he's a great player. He's a bit surprised he didn't make the all-decade team. I think him and Eric Weddle are neck and neck, but yeah, he's a player. He's a good safety in terms of coverage, zone coverage, and he's just a really good hitter as well.
So for my next safety, very, very small sample size in this decade, but I think he's the best safety of all time. I get Ed Reed.
Okay.
Only played 4 years in this decade, but he was a 3-time Pro Bowler, 2010, 2011, 2012. 2010, he was an All-Pro, Super Bowl ring. He's a Hall of Famer as well.
Yep.
I just think he's the best defensive player, or best safety of all time, so it's just hard to keep him off, even though he had such a small sample size.
Yeah, Ed Reed was a great player, and he was a part of that Super Bowl winning team as well. So that's a good pick by you. I'm gonna pick somebody who, again, flies under the radar. He retired a year ago with Oakland. He actually was second in interceptions this decade behind Richard Sherman. And when you hear that statistic, you would not think of this name, but I'm going to pick Reggie Nelson, who was a really, really good safety for the Bengals for a lot of those years where, again, Bengals aren't too great of a team. He led the league in interceptions with 8 in 2015 with the Bengals. He was one of those safeties, put him 15 yards away from scrimmage, and he's just an absolute ball hawk. He's like a center fielder at safety. He's not going to rack up 100 tackles in a season, but he's always going to be just an absolute ball hawk and just hunt down the pass whenever it comes.
Yeah, I completely agree. He was on my list as well as one of my backups.
Yeah.
He played for the Bengals, which like hurt his career.
Yep.
They had some good teams, but they're one and done in the playoffs every time.
Yeah.
I think he's a really solid player, and a lot of people would love to have him on their team.
Yep. So getting into special teams now, do you want to go first with punter?
Punter, yep.
We have to have the same punter here.
So punter, a little biased, but I had Pat McAfee.
Yeah, I love Pat.
He retired early, but he's just a great guy. He's hilarious. He was an extremely good punter. He was able to pin the ball pretty deep in the field. He wasn't a punter when he started his career off. I think he was a kicker, I believe, when he got drafted at West Virginia. But he was able to transition into becoming a punter.
Mm-hmm.
The Colts had a really solid special teams with him and Vinatieri.
Yeah, he did. He was a really great holder too, which is kind of like goes under the radar in terms of punter. That's very important. That's why Hecker is such a great punter too. He's a really good holder. Pat McAfee was a great player. He's he's a great kickoff guy too.
Yeah.
He could deliver some hard hits too on the kickoff team. So
yeah, you got drug tested for laying out Trenton Holiday.
Yeah, yeah. It's always great when guys like punters or kickers have a lot of personality to them. So I really appreciate that with Pat McAfee. That's a great pick. That was going to be my pick for punter. Since you stole that, I'm going to go with Andy Lee as my punter. He played for the 49ers for the majority of this decade. He also played for the Cardinals. He's pretty old now, but Andy Lee's a really great kicker, and him and Andy Lee and Shane Leckler were really the two punters who revolutionized the way punters punt. Before, even I know Pat McAfee talks about this, you just punted the ball as hard and far as possible, but they really started with the backspin and trying to punt as close as the end zone as possible and have it backspin so it lands inside the 5 or 10. So Andy Lee's definitely been a great punter as well this decade. So going on to my kicker, there's a lot of great kickers this decade, actually. I was deciding between two guys, but I think I'm gonna pick Matt Bryant. He's just he's top 5 in field goals made this decade and field goal percentage this decade, along with extra points made this decade and extra point percentage. He's been really solid. He has a great leg. And he's been Mr. Reliable for the Falcons for the majority of his career.
Yeah, I completely agree. He was my my second option. My kicker I had was Vinatieri. So him and Vinatieri are pretty much very similar players. Like they play, when they trotted out on the field, you knew it was going in.
Yeah.
Vinatieri until recently isn't like that, but they're very reliable. It goes in when they kick it, and I think they're pretty much like two like solid kickers their whole careers.
Yeah, for sure.
So for kick returner, I had Jacoby Jones.
Yeah, that's a good pick. That's a really good pick.
He wasn't really a wide receiver in his career. He didn't really play like he played on offense when they needed him. But I think he was just him in the kick return game really opened up a lot of things. He returned a kickoff in the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Really separated the Ravens from the 49ers. He's a really solid player. He's fast, long legs, big body, so it's hard to tackle.
Yep. No, that's a really good pick. I mean, he had some great games in that playoff run for the Ravens too. I believe he had a kick return touchdown in the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken. If not,
Yeah.
I know he had a touchdown in the Super Bowl.
He did.
So
I
now,
think it was right when the lights got turned back on. He returned it for a touchdown.
yeah, no, he was a great player for those Ravens team. He was part of a very controversial play in NFL history where Mike Tomlin stepped onto the field and tried to mess up his path. So yeah, Jacoby is an iconic player. So for my kick returner, I'm gonna pick somebody who's drafted in 2015, so he doesn't have that big of a sample size, and he kind of came onto the scene as a wide receiver as of late, and that's Tyler Lockett. He led the league in kick return yards in 2017 with 949, and he also led the league in kick return touchdowns that season with 1. I'm sure he was tied for that, but he has 2 kick return touchdowns this decade, and he's been just a really good kick returner, really fast, really shifty, really elusive. I know he had that scary injury at some point, but he's good now, and he's a really good kick returner for sure.
Yeah, I didn't really think about Tyler Lockett. He's more of like I think he's like the number 1 weapon on the Seahawks right now.
Yeah, he is. But he back up Doug Baldwin for a little while Doug Baldwin was dominating.
But now I know the stats and I agree with your pick.
Yeah. So for my punt returner, he's a player who actually made the all-decade team this decade, but as another position, this is a player who only returned punts for about 3 years, but when he did, he was not only one of the best punt returners of this decade, but one of the best punt returners of all time. And that's going to be Patrick Peterson. Now, the Cardinals realized very quickly Patrick Peterson was way too valuable of a cornerback to have him returning kicks and have him returning punts. And they didn't want to have that risk with him, but man, I remember that 2011 Cardinals season when he was a rookie. He had 699 punt return yards, which is absolutely insane. Led the league in punt return yards that season. And he had 4 punt return touchdowns, which is tied for an NFL record, I believe, which also led the league that year. And I will never forget that play where he let the Rams punt get down all the way into the end zone, and he returned that for a touchdown. So he also led the league in the longest punt return that year with 99 yards. The next season, he led the league in punt returns. He had 500 yards that season. So Patrick Peterson, for a couple-year stretch, was a really, really great punt returner.
Yeah, that was my number 1 option. With like the play of him backpedaling.
Yep.
It's just iconic. For my punt returner, I had Tavon Austin.
Yeah, Tavon Austin. Great pick.
Almost 1,500 punt returning yards, 3 touchdowns. He had a 98-yard punt return.
Yeah.
And he was my other flex player, so he was my second consideration for flex player, so he was able to play all of the ball. He's so quick. He's a utility. Yep. So
he was coming out of college. He was kind of regarded to be a better wide receiver than he turned into in the NFL. I think he's been a bit of a disappointment, but I think those early Fisher-led Rams teams really misused him with Sam Bradford under center too. So it's kind of a what if with Tavon Austin's career, but nonetheless, he was a great returner for sure.
So for coach, some may say it's a snub from it. I had Andy Reid.
Yeah.
Super Bowl champion in the decade, at like the most recent year. A long playoff run with the Chiefs. He was able to. He's one of the greatest minds, offensive minds in NFL history. His coaching tree is insane.
Yep.
And I think he's a great coach.
Yeah, he's one of the highest decorated coaches of all time. He really just needed that Super Bowl win to cement that. I would push back on it if it wasn't for this playoff run he made and ended up winning the Super Bowl. He's kind of notorious for being bad with managing the clock and bad in the playoffs, but man, he's had some insane seasons. I mean, he turned Alex Smith into an MVP candidate. He's been an absolute great coach for sure, but he's had some playoff blunders, one you know very well, against the Colts.
Yeah.
So for my coach of the decade, really, really, really impressed me this last season and the season before that, and that's going to be John Harbaugh. He won the Super Bowl with the Ravens in 2016, or no, not 2016, 2013, I believe. And John Harbaugh is one of those coaches where he's really cemented himself to be one of the best coaches in the NFL. So it's plausible for him to have his own system, but he's really a player's coach, and he's a coach where he has his system fit around his players, not players who fit around his system. So he was able to completely transform his team with drafting Lamar Jackson. Nobody knew how good this Ravens team or offense was going to be this season, and they just came out with a bang. Nobody thought they could run Lamar Jackson as much as they did, and they did it. So I think John Harbaugh is one of the best coaches of this decade for sure. He's one of those coaches where he started off as a special teams coach, but he really is an example where you don't need to be a great offensive or defensive mind to be a great coach.
Yeah, he was my second option. I think he really knows what his players are, what kind of skill they have, so he really knows how to get the most out of them. I think he's a great leader.
Yep.
Super Bowl champion this decade. He was able to create an incredible offense this year with Lamar Jackson.
Yep.
Hollywood Brown. I think he's just a really good coach.
Yeah, and I think a pretty glaring person we didn't put in our coaches was Sean Payton, but where I'd push back with Sean Payton and why I didn't even consider him, I had John Harbaugh and Andy Reid as my top two guys, which is we both picked. Sean Payton missed the playoffs 3 straight years this decade. Not only that, everything with Bountygate, he got suspended for a year, and I think he's much more involved than it's kind of said to believe. So I think that really tainted his legacy a little bit. Obviously, he won the Super Bowl in the 2009 to 2010 season, but yeah, I think we had some pretty good picks for those coaches.
Yeah, I don't know. Sean Payton, I think he's I don't know. He has a very good quarterback, which might help him a lot.
Yeah.
He's a bit arrogant. I think he put the choking sign and towards some of the players on the other team. I forgot what team it was, but I don't know. I think him not having a Super Bowl this decade made me not want to put him on as one of my options.
Yeah, for sure. Other great coaches, Bruce Arians, he won Coach of the Year 2 times. He's a bit of a playoff choker as well, though, with the Cardinals. Ron Rivera, of course, he won Coach of the Year twice this decade as well. He did just get fired, but I think that was a really great signing for the Redskins. Mike Tomlin is another guy who was kind of on the cusp for me, but yep.
This list, it was harder than I thought. I went into it with it's gonna be easy, but it was harder than I thought.
For sure.
Having all the stats, I was for D tackle, I had Kyle Smith, and he played for the 49ers, and he had a very small sample size, and not a lot of people know who he is, but he was a very ferocious player.
Yeah.
A lot of the people I picked were lesser known and as second options.
Yeah, and it was tough because the all-decade team picked a lot of players per position. 4 or 5 players each position for some positions. So I think, again, in conclusion, the 2010 all-decade team roster, I think it's pretty good. Yeah, we picked some players that didn't make it, and I think we both have some pretty good teams here.
Yeah, I think we both did a great job.
Yeah, I really like the Cordell Patterson pick on the specialists for the all-decade team too. He was a great specialist.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
Well, thank you everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you later.